Ninja Leaders Podcast, episode number 24.
Welcome to the Ninja Leaders Podcast, taking you and your student organization to the next level. And now, your host, Nick Palkowski.
I'm so glad you could join us for this episode of the podcast. Today we're going to have a great episode. I'm super excited for this interview because it was an outstanding interview. I actually had the chance to talk to Scott Fay. Scott is a leadership trainer who actually works very closely with someone we mentioned quite regularly on the podcast, which is John Maxwell. But Scott really focuses in on life plans especially, and helping people discover their sweet spot. So we're going to be talking about his latest book, which is called Discover Your Sweet Spot. And this is an excellent interview, and I hope that you sit down, you actually grab a pen and paper. So I know many of you listen to this while you're running, while you're working out, while you're driving. This is going to be one that you're going to want to come back to later with pen and paper and actually take some notes on this, because I think it is an outstanding interview. So here we go with our interview with Scott. Scott, I want to thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, Scott, I already gave our listeners a quick little introduction to who you were, but I wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself. So just why don't you tell everyone, who is Scott?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question to ask a person, but I'll tell you that I often say I'm a product of the product, meaning, and I don't think that's so different from anyone else. We are a result of the books we read and the people we spend time with. And I'm very intentional about the books that I read, the information I take in, and the people I spend time with. So I'm a product of entrepreneurs, of thought leaders, of people who specifically talk a lot about leadership, about influence, about communication, and about being a life learner. I am a practitioner of those things. I'm an entrepreneur. I either own or partner on several businesses, most of which are based in Florida. So the lessons that I've learned and the truths that I've discovered come from that good old-fashioned school, the school of hard knocks. And I've had some good, I've had some bad, and I've had some ugly. But I'm just a real guy. And I often say I'm a guy who wears jeans and boots, and I love to drive a pickup truck, and I've learned some really, really important lessons. That's who Scott Fay is.
Well, that's awesome. You definitely sound like my kind of guy, and I'm very excited to dive a little bit more into to who you are, to the journey you've had, to the things you've learned, and to especially the one book that you are just releasing very soon. I'm really excited to be talking about that, and we'll get to that in just a second. But
Okay.
I always like to start the podcast out with a success quote. So, Scott, what is your favorite success quote?
I think the one that I quote more often than not, and there's a bunch, the one that's probably my favorite comes from Jim Rohn, who said, if you want to do, be, or have more, you have to become more. And because I think there's so many applications to that, when I teach, I speak, I mentor or coach, I refer to that as a basic building block. I also refer to John's quote, there's two important days in a person's life, the day they're born and the day they discover why. It's really important to know why you're here on this place we call planet Earth with 7 billion other people. It's amazing that we all have a very specific calling. We all have a very specific role in this big mass of all these people. There's something that's unique to our DNA. It's just as unique as the DNA that we'd find in a strand of hair. It's our unique calling. And when we discover why, it's pretty amazing. So those are two quotes, and there are several, but there's a couple.
Oh, I love both those quotes. Those are excellent quotes. But Scott, now I want to ask you, you can pick either one of those quotes, but how do you actually apply this quote in your life? Let's get down, dirty, tactical.
Sure.
You know, you can talk about a specific event maybe, but how do you actually apply it in your life?
Well, I think there's a desire, a God-given desire, if I could say it that way, but there's a desire that it's innate in all of us to do, be, or have more. It's part of our scripting. And there's a lot of discussions around that, but we all have that desire of growth, and we all want for a better outcome, fuller, richer, deeper, whatever that looks like. And when you really understand that in order to have a different outcome, it has to be an inside job before it becomes an outside job. So if you want to have more, understanding what it's like to become more is really important. So you ask, so how does that flesh out? Well, I think there's a few steps. I think number one is you have to really decide what you want. It's funny to me, Nick, when I present that question, people almost kind of roll back like, is that the best you got? But it's a deep question. And it gets deeper, and you flesh out what you really want with the next two questions. But what is it you really want? Now, to help qualify the question, go to the second question. When you identify some things that you really want, then that's desire. And desire is talked about in some of the classics like Think and Grow Rich. Napoleon Hill talked about a burning desire. And when you know what that desire is, he says successful people, once they know their burning desire, make their decisions quickly and easily and seldom, if ever, change their mind because they know what they want. So the first one is, what do I want? The second one is, what am I willing to pay for it? If the first question determines your desire or helps you identify your desire, the second question is about sacrifice. What am I willing to pay for it? This could be a great differentiator because there's things we think we want, but if we're not willing to pay that price, we'll never have them. And we have to kind of really wrestle with that. I often say that I have a guarantee that I can give you that will work every time. There's very few things that will always work. This will work. If you go to an auction and you pick out something that you want, I can guarantee you'll get that thing that you want. It's not a very profound answer, but it's the answer. It's when you're the person who's willing to pay the most for it. I mean, somebody's going to go home with that article, that thing. And it's always the person who's willing to pay the most for it. What do I want? What am I willing to pay? The third question is, and how long do I want to keep it? If the first question is about desire, the second one's about sacrifice, the third one's about commitment. And commitment is over the long haul. Now you've asked, okay, about this quote, tell me about this, if I want to do, be, or have more, I have to become more. Well, what is it you want to do, be, or have? That's the desire. How badly do I want it? That's the sacrifice, what I'm willing to pay for it. And how long do I want to keep it? Is this a big rock for me or not? And that's what I'm willing to do to maintain or get it. And with the way it translates into our life, so it's practical, down and dirty, as you say, is, first of all, taking some time to think about it, really think about what we want, and think about what we're willing to pay for it, and then put the thinking aside, strap on the boots, and get to work and doing it. Things don't just land in our lap. A lot of people say, wow, you became an overnight success, people who know my story. And I say, yes, I did. After 20 years of hard work, I became an instant overnight success. That's what the quote means to me, down and dirty.
And that's so true. It's so often you hear people talk about instant success or overnight success, and many of you, I've talked to many of those people who have had that instant success, but they tell me the exact same thing. It's 10 years in the making. It's 20 years in the making. What people don't realize is all the hard work that goes behind all of that instant success, as you said.
And if I could add just this piece to it, Nick, because it's not just hard work. Because there's a lot of people who have worked hard their entire life and have nothing for it. So you say, wait a minute, I know a lot of people who work hard. Yeah, it's not just hard work. It's work, or it's experiences with insight. And it's important to put in the reflection. Some people have 20 years of experience. Very few people do. But there's a few who have 20 years of experience. Most people have 1 year experience. They've just done it 20 times. And there's a big difference. So it's not just hard work.
That's an excellent little statement there. I know I'll be using that from now on. But I just wanted to ask you, in this big auction of your life, what really is that one thing that you're willing to pay for?
Oh, thank you for asking. When I really, first of all, let me digress for 1 minute and say that, knowing what you really want evolves when done well. It evolves into your purpose statement. I mean, you just know. And the thing about a purpose statement is it doesn't have to be something that looks good on a plaque, hanging on the wall. It doesn't have to be poetic. It doesn't even have to be profound to anybody else. You just have to know what it means. So I have one that means a lot to me, and I'm not going to share it with the world because it's so personal, right? That it just means something to me. But I will tell you this, part of it is not only living to my purpose and with passion according to a plan, but here's what matters to me, is helping those who are interested in knowing, finding and knowing and living their purpose with their passions according to their plan. So ultimately, in the auction of life, as you've called it, and I like that, the really big thing is I walk around this auction yard of life. The big thing is that I want is knowing that my life makes a contribution, and it's specific enough that it includes family, friends, and then those who live according to that purpose. I'm not here on planet Earth just to help everybody. I would like to. I'll do my best to be a light in a dark world and all of that. But my particular thing that I'm willing to pay whatever it costs and stay committed to for my lifetime, is helping, is first of all living congruent with that message myself, living according to my sweet spot, and then helping other people live according to theirs.
Well, that's awesome. And I think this is a perfect way to actually transition into your latest book, your newest book, Discover Your Sweet Spot, the seven steps to create a life of success and significance. Is that correct?
Right. That's it.
Awesome.
You got it.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about this book? What was your whole reasoning behind actually writing that? And I think you started to lay out that reasoning, but I just want to hear it even more in depth.
Well, here's what I love about the sweet spot is first of all, it's intriguing, and it's a word picture that many people can identify with. If you've ever hit a ball with either a bat, a golf club, a tennis racket, and then there are other examples as well, but those are three common ones. When you hit that ball on the sweet spot of the bat, the club, or the racket, it has a special sound. It has a special feel. You don't even have to look. You know where the ball's going, right? And here's the incredible thing about the sweet spot, is you get extraordinary results with very little effort. I mean, that word picture just resonates with me. And I think about that when you think of the true greats, the people who are extraordinary in any one field, they found the sweet spot. And they live right there. They don't get distracted. They understand that busyness isn't just accomplishment, that activity isn't just accomplishment, but that it's doing the right things at the right time with the right people for the right reasons, right? All of that dials right down. You could, to a very specific point, first of all, let me finish that thought. You could hit the ball on just a gazillion different places on the bat and get totally different results. There's a very specific spot that's the sweet spot. And at first, we hit it by luck. We start out and we just happened to, whoa, that felt good, that sounded good, and did you see where that ball went, right? And then, so we hit it by luck, and then the more we play, the more often we get lucky, so to speak. And then, but if we're intentional, we say, wait a minute, what did I just do there? Well, that just really worked. Now, how can I duplicate that? And then we practice it. And then we get consistent at it. So it starts with knowing and then finding and then doing, Well, so that's the big idea. Then I thought, well, how can I share that concept out of my life? And it comes from my business, my lifetime, my 20 years experience that I talked about earlier as a landscaper, where we build an intentional environment, if you will. And we start with, what do you want? Ultimately, and so we do a design, we build, and then we maintain an environment that's conducive to your idea, to your plan. So when we do a landscape, we don't just show up with trees and plants and bushes, right? We start with the questions. we said, what is it you really want, Nick? I mean, is this curb appeal? I'm talking about landscape now. Or is this a place to recreation? Is it a place to hang out with little kids or adults? Are you going to have cocktails in the evening or little kids running around? Or is this a place to read and meditate? It's totally different. And when we know that, then we set out with the design. And I may be getting ahead of you here, so let me hit pause if I am.
You're going excellent. I guess just like where you're headed. What is the best way for the listeners on this podcast to actually go through and start discovering what their sweet spot is, or how do they know? How can they know when they actually find their sweet spot?
Yes, so I'm a word picture guy. So for some people, it's actually picturing that bat, that golf club, that tennis racket, and how would you go about it, finding and living in that, and then hitting in the sweet spot consistently and whatever. And that's an action. And for life, I'd like to move right over to that metaphor with landscape because it's detailed, it's involved. You might say, as a speaker, boom, this is what I have to do to hit the sweet spot. But in life, in general, there's a master plan. It's pretty developed, right? And we talk, for most of us, there's like five really domains in our life: our personal life, our family, our vocation. For many, it's a faith community, and the outside community: personal, family, vocation, faith, and community. And so when we say, living in the sweet spot, it's considered all things. Stephen Covey called it principle-centered leadership, where you're not just focused on one of those domains. You're focused on your whole life. And how do we become principle-centered? So the metaphor here is 7 steps, and the first one is to find your sweet spot. It's to find your purpose, that we talked about. And when you know your purpose, then it's that's the first step in the 3 areas of sequence: design, build, and maintain. So we're gonna design. And in the book, I talk about the different components, if you will, of the design and things you have to take. There are some design flaws. There's some things that, it's really good to bring in some outside professionals. There are people who'd run off to Home Depot, could spend a lot of money, load up a truck, bring back a bunch of plants, and we've all driven by those homes, right? Mm-hmm. Where there's lots of stuff, but there was no design. And in the design, not only does it have to be a design, but it has to be a design of attention and thinking with the end in mind. Some plants grow to a great magnitude of size, has to be scaled. And then there's other things you would expect it to become a mighty tree, only to find out it's a dwarf variety. It never turns into anything. Yeah. So it's that design. And then in the build process, we roll up with trucks and guys, and we have the greatest design, and the architect did a fine job and met with the client. Man, this is exactly what we want. And then we get there. And a common thing for us is we find out that there was an unmarked utility in the ground that cannot be moved. Maybe it's fiber optic, and it's it couldn't be moved, but it would cost an awful lot of money, Or it's a septic system, or it's usually a utility that's in the ground. We're doing a very large project right now where it was a huge rock bed right under the grass that nobody knew about, and we had to change the elevation. I mean, we're talking about a $600,000 change. Yeah, this is a major estate, okay, on Jupiter Island. This rock had to come out, and it was a big deal, okay? So this happens. You can have the best intention of the world, and it happens in our life. We start out. I just spoke with just a few minutes ago on a teaching call. She's 65 years old, thought she was out of raising children, and then had to rescue her grandchildren and adopt them. And now she has 3 kids, 11, 8, and 6, or something like that. And she's 65 years old. Guess what? Her life changed, okay? Yeah. She had a design, but it got changed. We call those, environmental situations. That happens in life. And so we can have a design, but we got to be willing to make some adjustments. And so that happens in the build process. And we find them, and we deal with them. And then once we build and construct that life, then there's steps that have to be taken to maintain it. And I often find that people get excited about looking at plants and walking through garden centers and dreaming and picking out water features and the fun stuff. And they get excited about the people coming and putting them in, and then we're done. Wow, you stand back and what a transformation. And then there's maintenance. And maintenance, we call that the humdrum of life. If we're not careful, we look at it that way. But if you think about it, that's where the real value begins to develop. In the landscape, trees mature, and a mature tree becomes beautiful. And plants flower and bloom, and it's in the maturity, the fullness, the richness. But it only comes with a real intention of maintenance, of the right fertilizer and the right amount of water and nurturing and trimming and pruning at the right time and all of that. So,
yes.
Is that what you're asking, my friend?
That is exactly what I was asking. I think that was excellent. And I mean, I definitely resonate with the whole landscaping metaphor, because I took a lot of landscaping classes and actually kind of started my own little landscaping business when I was in high school.
Good.
I'm not in that anymore, but it was definitely an area that I have a lot of passion with as well. Sure. So I definitely resonate with the metaphor. What I really want to ask you, though, is which of these areas have you struggled with maybe the most, or maybe is the hardest for you to actually work with, the design area, the build area, or the maintenance area?
Well, there are different challenges at each step. Mm-hmm. And it's a great question. One of the things I'm a big believer in the design personally is to have your life plan, is to do a life plan, to go through the experience, with a coach or a facilitator, because if we're not careful, we will be exposed to greatness, and we will say, well, what did you do? And we take on what that great person did, and it's like wearing somebody else's cloak or somebody else's armor. It doesn't fit us. It's so in the first step of the design, it's not only knowing what you want, but it's knowing who you're designed. So purpose, passion go into this plan. And I think if we don't take the time to understand those things, purpose, knowing who you're designed to be, passion is knowing what you love to do. And then the plan that we're talking about when we design, build, and maintain, the plan isn't just a random plan. It's based on fact. You see, your purpose is it comes from the clues that we get with our talents. What are you talented in? But that's only part of it. The other half of it is your heart. What do you love to do? I know a lot of people who are good with numbers, good with math, so they assume they should become an accountant. And they went on to school, got all the schooling, they aced their schooling because they're good with numbers. Mm-hmm. And they show up the first day in a coat and tie, got the briefcase, the suitcase, the travel luggage, whatever it is, right? And they go into their office and they sit down at a desk and they realize, uh-oh, what am I doing here? I love being outside. I love being with people. 95% of my day is I'm in this room by myself doing the number crunches. My talents afford me that ability, but it has nothing to do with my purpose. It has nothing to do with my heart. So I think you have to, in this whole design piece, yes, you have to know what you want. And that comes from the heart, but you got to also understand your talents. So I think that's the pitfalls that can happen right there. And one of the questions I get asked often is, what are some of the failures, that you've had, Scott? And it's a great question. And by the way, it's a question that those of you looking at this podcast or watching this podcast, I'd encourage you to ask anybody that you come across that you really want to glean from. What are the mistakes? And early on, I was a landscaper. I paid my way through college being a landscaper. And I found I was good at it. And I loved business and I love horticulture. But in my scripting, in my mind, I thought, I don't want to be just a landscaper. So I sold my business and I pursued in 3.5 years, 6 different jobs, trying to find something that would look more significant to people. I tried things. So I wanted to be the white collar guy, not the blue collar guy. And so I went out and pursued white collar jobs and I hated it. And it was one of the biggest, that I learned from. It was one of my biggest failures, leaving what I had and pursuing something that wasn't even in my scripting. And it turned around that I learned the most from that failure, which, by the way, is often the case. So that was a great failure and a great learning. I think in the build part, some pitfalls we run into is when we're not willing to remove some things, and I'll use the landscape metaphor, on the site that need to go. And I talk about getting rid of the weeds. And we say, let's just put this stuff in. And we got the trees on the trucks. We got the boulders, the pool.
Well, for those of you who are just joining us again, we got cut off, but we got Scott back. So now we're going to kind of jump back into where we left off. So Scott, you're talking a little bit about some of the fallacies that can happen. So why don't you keep taking it away?
Okay, sounds good. And I love Skype and all the technology that we have, but every once in a while we have some challenges.
Yeah.
So we talked about some issues we can have with design. The second phase is the build process, and we were talking about getting rid of those things, being willing to stop and get rid of the things that need to be removed before we build that which we want. I was at an event this week where I spoke about, everybody understands the importance of a to-do list, but have you ever had a stop doing list, a to not do list, the things that need to stop happening in your life? There are really four great questions. What do I need to do more of? What do I need to do less of? What do I need to start doing? And what do I need to stop doing? And in the building process, we'll show up at a site with all this magnificent stuff to put in the ground, and everybody's ready to go. And then we realize, wait a minute, there's some stuff in the ground that has to move. There's a tree that's in the way that doesn't fit. Oh, it's such a beautiful tree. It doesn't fit the plan. I'm sorry. It's got to come out. There are weeds, there are obstructions, and we've got to be willing to get rid of those. And then and there's so much more, but we'll hit the highlights. And then I think in the maintenance side, design, build, and maintain. Habits can be a wonderful servant, or we can become their slave. It's our choice. I lay before you both a blessing and a curse. So we've been given this thing we call a habit. And a habit can be a wonderful tool if we form the right ones. If we form the inappropriate habits, we become their slave. It's our choice. And in the maintenance of life, there are things that we do to maintain relationships, to maintain a good emotional state, a good spiritual state, a good physical state, a good intellectual state. These are all very important, but they don't happen by accident. When you meet somebody who's been married for 50 or 60 years, they weren't just lucky that they found the right person. You found two people who invested in each other, walked the journey of life together. When you find two business partners who have successfully worked together for a number of years, they weren't just lucky. They worked at it. When you find somebody who has become that overnight success that we talked about before, it's not somebody who was lucky. If it was, it's because when preparedness met opportunity, that was their luck. So those are some of the pitfalls, if you will, of those steps. And when we avoid those pitfalls, great things can happen.
Oh, and I love that last little part that you've been talking about habits, because we talk about that so much here on the podcast. I believe that habits, create who you are. It's your daily actions that lead to actually changes in your life that lead to those outstanding successes. So I love that you mentioned that as that final maintenance piece.
Good.
But Scott, we are almost out of time. And I want to for sure ask you one more question.
Okay.
Really quick, I just have to ask you an additional one about what is it like to work actually very closely with John Maxwell?
Oh, thank you. There's an old saying that says, don't ever meet your hero, because everybody's human, everybody has their flaws. But there are a few special people in the world that the more you get to know, the more you like. The more you get to know, the more you appreciate. John's one of those people. And I do have the ability to work very closely with him. Some of my favorite moments have been when we get to fly somewhere together, and we've been in a private plane, and we're at 30,000 feet, and the shoes are kicked off, and you're comfortable. And that's where the fellowship happens. We left the work on the ground and we're just having fellowship. Here's John, first of all, is the real deal. But the learning piece of this is he is mentoring the whole time. If you want to be a better golfer, you golf with better golfers. You want to be a deeper thinker, run with deeper thinkers, right? And John is a guy who spent his life building life principles and life systems, and the way he does life is congruent and he is authentic. And so I think the biggest takeaway of working closely with a man like John Maxwell is I've come to my personal life, my relationships, and the things that I value have come to a whole different level because he's modeling that. He invests, and then he's also willing to be transparent. All right, guys, this is not my wheelhouse. This is not where I'm good. So
awesome. Well, yeah, John's definitely been someone that I've looked up to a long time, and I think that is exactly right. Your big takeaway there is just surrounding yourself with those people, and no matter what level you're at, you can find those people who can lift you up to that next level. I think that's a key takeaway for our listeners.
Right.
But Scott, before I ask you this last question, if our listeners want to find any more information about you, maybe get your book, what is the best place for them actually to go and do that?
There's a couple things. One is a Facebook. Right now, it's just a personal Facebook page, Scott M. Fay, and so that's one way to connect. My email address is scott@scottfay.com, and my website is scottfay.com. It's F-A-Y, no E. So scottfay.com is the website. And we're working on that presently, and there's some more to be offered there, but that'll get us in the right church anyways, and we'll find the right pew from there. How's that?
Awesome. And I'll be sure to include all the links to every resource you've mentioned in this episode at nickpalkowski.com/024 for episode 24. But Scott, the last question I want to ask you is, right now we're in the middle of September, and school is finally hitting high gear for all of the students out there. Tests are coming up, all those things. What is your biggest piece of advice for them in order to help be sure that they have a really strong school year?
Well, somebody asked John one time, what's the one thing you need to know about leadership? And John said, the one thing you need to know about leadership, there's more than one thing. And of course, it's a big question you're asking.
Yes.
And I hope that there'll be some nuggets in what we've shared today that will help. I think no matter whether we're a student or where we are in life, the understanding of priorities. And so I want to give you some really quick thoughts of priorities. I also think that understanding stages of life, and I'm going to hit this really quickly, are really important to understand. At some point, you have to understand the three stages of life and progression in an area of life where you learn, and then you earn, and then you return. And when we get those things confused, bad things happen to good people. We all want to make the contribution, or we all want to make a lot of money. The learning part is not the fun part. But I'm telling you, if we're willing to pay the price, if we're willing to go through the process and go through the learn and then earn and then return, that will serve you. And maybe someday we'll circle back around and do that lesson, because that's a great lesson. The point that I really want to make is the idea of understanding priorities. So if you're willing to first admit, okay, I'm in a learning stage. I'm going to learn. I'm going to learn full on. Someday, if I get a part-time job, it's there just to help me. But right now, I'm focusing on learning. I'm a student, and I'm going to stay focused on that. Now, in the learning, to have priorities, there's three ways to help you get the right priorities. What's required of me, what brings me the greatest return, and what brings me the greatest reward. And I think this fits in any chapter of life, any season of life we're in. Number one, if you're a student, you got to know what's required of you and make that your priority. And just put your head down. It may not bring you a great return or a great reward, but that's required. Get it done. Just get it done. Quit sucking your thumb. Quit whining about it. Get it done. And then there are things that bring us a great return, and understand what those are. Like there are things that we could do with very little effort and get great results. And so know where you're strong, and don't dilly-dally around where you're not strong. Work to your strengths and manage for your weaknesses. Again, a whole nother lesson here, but we're hitting the top of the waves. And then the third one is, what brings me a great reward? I don't care if you're a student, or you're in the learning, earning, or returning stage of your life or of a process, make sure you're taking the time to do the things that refuel you, that reward you. There's things that you can't give and work out of emptiness. So what brings you the greatest, what's required of you, what brings you the greatest return, what brings you the greatest reward. And I hope the big takeaway is that in life, in any season, any session, in any particular theme of life that we're in, if we'll learn to discover our sweet spot, our DNA, our purpose, our passion, and have a plan, that we will live to the sweet spot where our life has a special sound, it has a special feel. We don't even have to look. We know the results that we're going to get. And those results will come extraordinarily with very little effort.
Awesome, Scott. That was just amazing. I could literally talk to you all day long, I think. But I know we have some students out there who need to get to their next class. So, yeah. Scott, thank you so much for this incredible interview. Really appreciate it, and I know our Ninja Leaders community really appreciates it as well.
Thanks for the invite. It's been good to be together. Look forward to doing it again sometime. Thanks, Nick.
And I just want to thank you for tuning into this episode of the podcast. I hope you really enjoyed our interview with Scott. I know I sure did. I've actually already gone through and listened to this interview a couple times since I actually interviewed him, and I've been pulling out more and more great nuggets from there. I really think the points he was making about designing, building, and maintaining a kind of your life, your plan is very crucial. I think it's something that we need to be more intentional with. So I strongly encourage you, all your listeners out there, very first thing you should do is to sit down. Your take action step is to sit down before tonight and start figuring out some of your priorities. Start getting those in order, because I think that's kind of the ground floor. That's where you need to begin. That's where you start to design your life plan. Start to design what direction you want to go. And then it just kind of goes from there, working on designing your plan, working on building the systems, and then of course that maintenance every single day, just being in there and maintaining everything. And I'm going to highly encourage you to all get Scott's book. I'm going to leave a link in the show notes. Highly suggest you go there. You'll be able to figure out, you'll get instructions of how you can get the book actually early, but also when he publicly releases it, there'll be a link right there. So definitely go check that out. Again, the show notes, nickpalkowski.com/024 for episode 24. And I also want to highly encourage you to go, if you like this podcast, if you enjoyed this interview as well as others in the past, I really want to encourage you to go leave a review on the podcast, because that's how more people find out about that. In fact, I have a very special mini course for you if you go leave a review. And you can leave, I just want you to leave an honest review. 1 star, 3 star, hopefully 5 stars, but just go leave a review. And you can get that by going to nickpalkowski.com/awesome. So until next time, that is all the announcements. That is all the stuff I have for you for right now. But I will be back in touch with you next week. And until then, go out and take action.
On another edition of the Ninja Leaders Podcast.